You guys are good.
Okay, thank you. Okay,
Yeah, you have to take a picture
we're here, June sixth,
this way.
D-Day, Tuesday, June sixth, and planning board meeting. So our first item is a public hearing. This is for Driscoll, 143 Armonk Road. This is an application for an accessory apartment site. And we think that we can do this in one stop, so we are going directly to a public hearing. Is there a motion to open the public hearing?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Okay, Chuck, you're up.
Yeah, I was sharing a screen, but I don't see anything anymore. Maybe I'll stop sharing and go back on again. Hang in there.
Drink more.
We had the sharing was up there.
It was?
Yeah.
It was.
I'll do it again because I couldn't see it.
Yeah, so it's fine. It looks like you put some of mine already notes on there, right?
I got them all on there, my friend.
Okay.
I hope. Anything that says one is because Bob
There you go.
got to me. We're good?
Yeah, that's good.
All right, excellent. Let me just come back a little bit. This property, you're all very familiar with it. It was the cooking school on Armonk Road. At one time, there was on the first floor, a cooking school, and then classes, and originally with a parking lot, and a commercial kitchen, handicap bathrooms, and all of that stuff. What we're doing is we're going back and we're making it an accessory dwelling on the property. And you can see back here, I want to annotate for us. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. Here we go. Back here, at the back of the property, here's the main house. At the back, it's a two-story accessory dwelling. And the last time this was before you, it was a one floor. I would say more, special use permit, a school, and it had a whole bunch of things that it needed, and the building is totally sprinklered. The septic system was designed for the kitchen and the handicap bathroom, and all of the considerations down here, the considerations of view, for people leaving the driveway and coming in and out of the driveway. Right now, it's all residential, but we've included the previous views to the traffic coming down Armonk Road at the intersection of Taylor Road, coming out of the golf club area. What we do have, though, that's different from the last time is a patio that the planning board hasn't seen before, which contributed to the development coverage. And because of it, we ended up getting a variance for it at one time, after the original submission several years ago. Today, we have an issue with coverage, and I want to be sure everybody's clear that this is all a macadam driveway, and at this point, it turns into gravel. Now, I talked with Mr. Seoli, and he said, technically, if it's man-made, we want to consider the stormwater and runoff and all that stuff that's involved. So I put it on there, but it is gravel, it's not macadam. And I'm asking now, is there a percentage of gravel versus macadam? If you have gravel, is it considered macadam, or is it considered less than macadam with some permeability? Question for you, Bob, is that it?
Are you speaking of stormwater related curve numbers that are determined?
That's exactly right. I did it on stormwater as if this were impervious. But I only did it to calculate the area, because if you notice, we're 524 square feet over the coverage calculations, the building coverage. And so I'm wondering, is there
Development coverage, Chuck.
Say again, development, I'm sorry.
Development coverage, not building.
So, Chuck, to answer your question, first and foremost, the area of the new gravel
There is no new gravel. It's
Oh,
always,
new gravel.
it always was there.
Oh, okay, then it's not an issue.
Okay, so,
But it does exceed your allowable development coverage.
Well, we're talking about two different things here, Sabrina. You're
Yes.
talking about stormwater coverage for impervious, which is gravel, or development coverage, which is considered gravel and development coverage as well. So yes, Sabrina's point, she's correct.
so if there's no, my point, I guess there's no difference between gravel and macadam.
That is correct when it comes to development coverage, yes.
Okay, great. So, based on your memo, Sabrina, we are going to ask for a variance for the 544 square feet.
24.
Yeah, we also have to go to the zoning board anyway, because we're going from a one-story building to a two-story, we're adding a second floor. We didn't add the second floor, we're just using the second floor, for a bedroom. So the building department says that's increasing the use, so we have to get a variance. Also, because it's close to the property line. Are we all familiar, you get me on that, am I correct?
I'm not sure about the use variance.
No, not a use variance, we're using it differently than what it was approved for. And so we've increased the activity in the building. So not the side yards or anything, everything's the same.
I think if it's affected you as such, then that's where you need to be.
Okay, so we have to, he did say we need to go to the zoning board because we changed, not a school anymore.
Chuck,
Yes, sir.
what was the second floor, essentially the attic floor being used for before? Was it storage?
No, it was a full space, carpeted, there was
So it's
Yeah,
habitable, it was habitable space.
definitely habitable.
Okay.
And I'm gonna zoom in a little bit to let you, I'm gonna go here. The habitable space is anything from 7 foot 6 inches ceiling.
So if I may, just for a moment, Chuck, in my conversations with the building inspector, he never mentioned you need to go back to the zoning board for the use, like for increasing the use or changing the use.
Yes,
I would wanna check it because that upstairs was there prior to.
there's the upstairs, yeah, it was always there.
And I think it's fair,
Right.
I think it's fair to say that the proposed usage of this property is actually less than what it was
Correct.
with a cooking school.
Correct, so I think if you have some side yard issues and you have a development coverage issue, I believe that is what's driving you to the zoning board. I'm not sure about the now utilizing the upstairs differently because the entire building is being used differently than it was before.
And well,
I'll talk with Tom about that.
yeah, if we have to go to the zoning board for development coverage,
Correct.
well, we're going anyway, so we'll worry about that. If Tom wants it.
Right, but before, yeah, exactly, I just don't want you to have to go there for 3 things when you need 2 things, so to speak.
Yeah, the upstairs was supposedly for the cooking school and an office. There was a desk up
Yes.
there. And I wanna point out that these lines are the 7 foot 6 height of the ceiling. These lines are the 5 foot height where you start measuring habitable space from. And that all adds up to 379 square feet.
And Tom, the building inspector, did verify the size of the apartment, so everything is code compliant.
Yeah,
Is the footprint of the building changing at all?
no,
Okay, great. So is there anything being asked of us?
Now, why are we here? Good question.
No, I mean, we're talking about the zoning board, but we are not them.
Right, so you're here right now to approve the accessory, the use as an accessory apartment.
Alright, well, I love it.
Yeah, me too.
So I think the question too, so right now we're in a public hearing, so obviously if there's any members of the public, we should hear from them, but procedurally, I think the question for the board, we do know that there's variances that are required, so do you want to refer the applicant to the zoning board as part of the process and keep the public hearing open and have the applicant come back after they've taken the trip to the zoning board, or do you wanna close out the planning board process and your resolution would be subject to the applicant receiving the variances?
The latter.
So the board has two options.
I think we would prefer to
Agreed.
close it out and move it over to the ZBA.
Yeah.
The only observation I have for the applicant is there's a lot of macadam extra roadway in here. Is there any appetite for just reducing it so you don't even have to go to the ZBA for our development coverage? We've got a lot of loops in here and extra roadways.
It's a tough drive to the front door without a turnaround of some sort.
Okay.
And they've been using the two driveways all along. If anything, no, I've asked the applicant that question, can I get rid of this patio? But that's only 200 feet, I'm still short.
Sure, okay.
Okay? Yeah, thanks, but I was trying that also.
Okay.
Mr. Gerber.
Alright.
And Robert, I've got 3 cars and I've got your turnarounds and everything that we want. They're barely seen underneath above the macadam, but this guy's backing out to here, and these guys are backing out and going, this is a big tree in the middle. I've been there, it's quite a bit of space, for only 3 cars,
Right.
it works really easy.
Yeah, I've been reviewing the plan, thank you for sharing it, because quite honestly, Chairman, he put all my comments on the plan, so I have no more comments.
Great. Sabrina, any further comments? Sabrina?
No.
No, he put them all on the plan that we're looking at,
Okay,
so I'm good to go.
good. Any questions, comments from board members? No. Is there anyone here interested in this application or anyone, any hands up remotely from members of the public?
No hands are up.
Okay, not seeing any, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
It's the man in the cloud.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Should we direct staff to prepare a resolution for our next meeting?
I think so.
All right, is there a motion to do so?
Motion.
Okay, second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, terrific.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.
Good
Okay,
night, Adam.
our next item is the Chappaqua Crossing East Village, 480 Bedford Road. This is the application for a site development plan approval to perform a rock crushing on site. We last heard it as an informal on May 16. This is our first swing at a public hearing. Is there a motion to open the public hearing?
Motion.
Okay, second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, I think Mr. Otis is here for any questions that folks may have in connection with this application. I think there's one change, as I understand it, from the last time and from the application. I think initially the applicant had sought a 4-week license here, but it's my understanding that they have extended that to 6 weeks. Not that they're going steadily every single day, but I think when we spoke last time, it became apparent that they needed a few more days either way. And rather than have them come back and forth, we felt that 6 weeks was appropriate. And I think that's reflected in the document, right, Jennifer?
Oh, it isn't,
It's
I don't know if we need to make that change yet, but it can be, you can approve it as amended with the changing the 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay. And the only other issue that we had, of course, when we heard from members of the public was some of the stuff about dust that's in here, of course. And the applicant advised that they would be on top of that and take care of it. And I think from what Bob has told me that there's a building or development meeting this Thursday. And that will be one of the subjects to make sure that the dust control is appropriate and under control. So, are there any questions from board members? Anyone here for the public on this?
I wonder if you could just very quickly outline, I'm not familiar, but that is why I came to find out what
Okay.
is going on.
Yeah, Mr. Otis perhaps can tell us exactly what is going on.
My name is Robert Lewis, I live at 2 Roaring Brook Road, right across the street.
So Mr. Otis, if you could briefly just give us a summary of the activity that you will be pursuing on site.
Sure, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff. This application is proposing to locate a rock crushing piece of equipment kind of in the northern portion of the site. We're proposing to crush approximately 3,500 yards of rock over the period of about 15 to 20 working days. This is a temporary rock crushing operation, and we believe that we comply with the town code requirements. And I think that's generally everything associated with this.
Yeah, including the noise provisions, and I think the limitations of hours, so no weekend or holiday work. Monday through Friday, was it 8 to 4, I think? Were those the hours? I should read the resolution. But so there are guidelines in here. And again, what the applicant has done is they've selected a site on their work site that is as far away from outside homes and outside properties as possible. So I think the closest one was 330 feet, something like that, Mr. Otis?
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
I don't believe it's as far away as possible. It's just where it is.
Yeah, I guess. I don't, I might be misconstruing it, but when I looked at it, it was pretty close to one of those midpoints where it was really. But you might be correct. It might be.
We talked about it last time. It's where the rocks are.
Well, that's true too. True too. Yeah.
And there was some
Yeah, right.
conversation of spraying water, right, to keep the dust down.
Yes.
Some conversation about that,
Yeah.
so.
That was it's part of the protocol that's really built into this already, not just for the rock crushing, but for all construction itself. So it's supposed to be some sort of protocol where they wet things down, dirt, the roadways, to minimize the dust. And we're being challenged right now, it's been so dry, but anyway, that was already part of our protocol that we approved a number of years ago. Any questions at all? I mean, can you think of anything else that you might wanna hear about?
Not unless they're giving away gravel.
I don't think they're giving away anything. But anyway,
Thank you.
okay. Are there any other, anyone else with a hand raised electronically?
No hands are raised.
Okay, so not seeing any further public interest, is there a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Motion's carried. So we have before us, the next item is we have a resolution that was prepared by staff in anticipation of approval this evening, in anticipation of closing the public hearing. And the only issue that has to be changed is the 4-week to a 6-week. Where is that?
It's on the last page.
Okay. Yep, there it is. So line 25. So that will be changed to 6 weeks rather than 4 weeks. Okay. Other than that, are there any questions? If not, is there a motion to approve the resolution as amended?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Alright.
Okay, we're all set. Thank you, Mr. Otis.
Mr. Otis,
Thank you, Mr.
hang on a
Thank you,
second.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Otis, were you gonna say something?
Yes, thank you. I did receive an email confirmation from Felicia today, just for clarity on the the work was to be performed within 6 weeks of the building permit issuance. Just wanted to make sure Ms. Gray was aware of that and
Well, it reads 6 weeks from the filing date of this resolution. So that's not necessarily the building permit.
that, Mr. Chairman, we had put in a request with Felicia. Because we felt that 6 weeks from the resolution approval, and because there were conditions attached to this, that we felt the work would be performed within 6 weeks of the building permit issuance. And I received an email confirmation on that.
Right, let me just make sure I understand. So the 6 weeks, what the resolution says is that the rock crushing, the site plan approval shall expire if rock crushing operation does not occur within 4 weeks. We changed that to 6 weeks of the filing date of this resolution. Now, are you suggesting that you request to have that changed to be within 6 weeks of the issuance of the building permit?
Correct.
Instead of the filing of the resolution?
Correct. And I did receive an email from Felicia. I think that was today at 9:23.
I did send you that.
Yeah, I think there must have been some misunderstanding as far as what you were requesting, Greg. And I think maybe the focus was on changing it from the 4 to the 6, unless we weren't quite as focused on the part of the date of the resolution versus building permit. So I think what maybe Greg is requesting is if the board would amend the resolution that was just adopted to change that particular provision so that it's the site plan approval is valid for 6 weeks, starting from the date a permit is issued for the rock crusher, not 6 weeks from the filing date of the resolution, which will be tomorrow. So it's just a matter of when that 6 week period starts ticking.
Well, it seems reasonable, they're going to need 6 weeks for the work, so why start ticking now when they don't have a building permit, they can't start?
And Greg, did I describe that correctly?
You did, Jennifer. Thank you.
Okay.
That is correct.
So is that okay with you, Bob and Sabrina? We don't have any problems with that?
I think it makes perfect sense because they have to get a permit from the county too, and that may take a little bit of time, so frees them up a little bit more time.
Fair enough.
I agree as well.
So is there a motion then to amend the resolution once again and to approve the amended resolution to show that it would be 6 weeks from the issuance of the building permit?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, very good.
Mr. Otis.
Thanks for clarifying that.
Thank you.
Oh,
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board.
Mr. Otis,
Thank you.
Mr. Otis, I'd just like to say, I get over there every once in a while, I don't live on the other side of town, but things are looking really good over there. The buildings look great, I think. Landscaping is really done very well. I think that it's turning out to be a stellar product, and I just wanna thank you guys for living up to your word, and it looks really good so far, so thank you for that. And send the word to your team that at least I am very grateful and happy with the product so far.
Well, thank you very much for that feedback. We appreciate it, and we appreciate all the support from the town and the town staff. It has been a pleasure working side by side with everyone throughout the process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. All right, our next matter is the resolution for the lot line amendment at 45 North Way. This is between the town and Agastya. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, I'm sorry. Yep. So we spoke about this last time. This is an arrangement between the town and the property owner. And this is something that will, if it ever comes to pass, enable the chap line to be constructed. So we have the resolution before us. Are there any issues or questions on the resolution? No? If not, is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
Motion.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye?
Aye.
Okay, we're all set on that, thank you. The next item is Rosansky. This is 10 Cynthia Court. This is an application for a site development plan approval for construction of an in-ground swimming pool and stabilization of a gravel trail extending beyond the clearing and grading limit line. We asked for this on April 18th.
He's muted, he's talking, but he's muted.
Jerry, we can't hear you.
Didn't unmute, okay, sorry.
Got it.
I'm Jerry Bowers, site planner and landscape architect for the project. I see Alan Filch is with us, and I think Greg Rosinski is also gonna join us. So we're back with this project that we've been discussing with the planning board. As the chairman has said, this is a project to construct a swimming pool and a gravel trail to get down to the lower area of the backyard. The property is separated to an upper area with the house, and there's kind of a steep drop off, and then there's a septic area, a big open lawn area here. So I'll just summarize the plan. Here's that gravel trail that we talked about. A little wall here, and a little wall here, a little back to grade. This is the pool area. And
Jerry, you're not showing your screen yet, if you can share your screen.
I'm sorry. Okay, strike two. Okay.
Strike two.
Yes, you were the pool area.
I mean, it looks really good right now, but
Okay, how's that? Better?
it's getting there.
Not yet.
Give it a second.
We're getting there, Jerry.
This is sort of like an eye doctor test. That's better.
You're good.
Okay, I'm gonna go back, okay. Here's the property, here's the site, we got Brandon Drive here, Cynthia Court, and then this common driveway that comes all the way up here to serve these lots. We've got lots 5, 6, 7, and 8. Our lot is lot 7. This is lot 7 right here, this is lot 8, and this is lot 6. So there's a house that's built here. The applicants would like to build a swimming pool. It's really the only place here. This is really the place that would, I think, that for the Brandywine subdivision, there was a pool approved in that location, that general location. The last developer decided to knock it out, and the owners now want to put it back in. And the other thing is they'd like to be able, their property is separated from this upper area here to this lower area where the septic is and the big open lawn area that the family uses to play. It's connected now by a very steep path. So what we'd like to do is we'd like to put in a gravel path and the swimming pool. So this is just a detail of the plan, what's proposed. Existing home would come in with a patio area on 3 sides. We put a swimming pool in, and then this would be the gravel path coming down to the bottom. What we're showing here with all these lines, this green dashed line was the approved clearing and grading limit line for the NICIC application. That was the current approval. Prior to that, it was this blue line. That was the Brandywine thing. So the NICIC plan actually tightened up in places like this. And then, of course, when we came in, we realized that we have to expand that grading and clearing limit line so we can get this path in here. And we can get this area of the pool in here. And so that's part of the subject of this application. We're asking the planning board to consider amending the clearing and grading limit line. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to say, well, if we have to expand in one area, we'd like to contract in the other to try to make it so there's not a big net change in how much area was within the clearing and grading limit line. These were just the profiles of what was going on. We're proposing this. We've used this in the past very successfully. This was approved for the campfire site, if the board might remember, for the driveway loop worked very well. It's a 6-inch geo-web, and you fill it with gravel and it holds it in place. It gets staked to the ground very, very well. So when we went to the board, we said, okay, when this project was first approved, this was the clearing and grading limit line for the Brandywine subdivision that was in blue, and then subsequent, the NICIC project came in and it got changed to this green color, and then what we're proposing now, you can see there's our trail. So what we did was we tried to provide a graphic to say, okay, here's where the clearing and grading limit line was before. This is the green line, and here's where we need to expand in red. And every place we expand in red, we're going to compensate for that with areas in yellow that we're going to reclaim the natural areas. Last time we were before the board, we were proposing to reclaim some areas here. Staff felt that was already developed. It wasn't really practical to say that that's going to go back to natural areas. We agreed with them, and we were able to put those areas down below. And we have a planting plan for all these areas. So in terms of what we're doing for disturbance for this project to put it in, we had shown this little graphic to show that even though these are the clearing and grading limit lines that exist out there now, this is the area we're actually working. We're going to work from the garage in the back of the house and down here. So that's the area that would be disturbed for this project. We had gone through and we've done a comprehensive erosion control plan to keep areas stable during construction. And of course, we did a landscape plan afterwards to stabilize that and revegetate the areas. We are in receipt of Dennis's memo, and I think his comments are well taken, and we're looking forward to working with Dennis to amend the planting plan so it meets the criteria that he listed in his memo. Sabrina had a comment in her, this is a detail of the 50-degree limit line, and Sabrina had a comment in her memo, and she said, well, it seems like, these retaining walls, here's this red line here is the Brandywine line, here is our line, we're following the Nicket line here, and her comment seemed to be, well, shouldn't the older retaining walls that are already built be within the developed area, and we think that makes sense too. So what we'd like to do is come back with a plan to amend that clearing grading limit line again to show this solid red line, which we have it running on the back of all these retaining walls. So now all these retaining walls will be part in here. You notice here as well. All these retaining walls now will be within the clearing grading limit line because clearly there was work done there. So it seems to be logical and makes sense. So we would adjust as practical these areas were in yellow that would compensate for these areas in red. So we think we can get that worked out. So that seemed to make sense, and we keep that number about the same. The other thing that came up was, Bob had pointed out, Bob did a lot of work, and we appreciate that. And he correctly pointed out there was an issue with the development coverage. We did our numbers based on this as-built survey from Maris. So we know that our numbers for what here is that what we took, though, however, when we took our development numbers for the common driveway, we took those from the approved Nicket plan. So, and then Bob, kudos to Bob, he picked up an error. And in these, Bob correctly pointed out, we have to take, here's Cynthia Court, and here's, you gotta take, a quarter of this area, and you gotta take a third of this and a half of this, and Bob pointed out a typo that was made on the original CalArt plan. We went back and we looked at Bob's numbers, and we went and we ran our numbers compared to Bob's, and we're within 100 square feet, so we think Bob's right. And we'd like to update our development coverage and plan and submit that back. So that's where we are with, you can see Bob's numbers. Bob came up with like 15,442, and we're like 15,336. And given we're dealing with that scales and we're using PDFs and that kind of thing. So I think we're on the same page. So that's where we are with where the site planning aspects of this, and I know Alan also has got some comments from Bob that he's prepared to talk about as well.
Sure, good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the planning board. I did receive the comments from the town engineer, and perhaps I could just, I think what I'd like to be able to do with regard to bracketing, if you will, the amount of new impervious surfaces. When I went through my numbers, and I did go through it very carefully in calculating the amount of existing impervious surfaces from the survey, plus the amount of new impervious surfaces on the graphic, so just giving an idea of what it would entail. I think that what I'd like to be able to do is sit down with Mr. Scioli, just sort of go through the numbers with him, so we can all be on the same page with regard to the amount of new impervious surfaces. Because I saw, for example, in one of the tables in the stormwater report, I called it new impervious, and it really wasn't new impervious. It was a calculation of impervious surfaces. So I'd like to be able to go through that. Jerry, if I could just share for a moment, you can share for a second. Then maybe what I could do is share screen. Should be able to do it. Here it is. So what I have here, for example, just to illustrate this, is under the existing condition, what I had done is sort of map out every single impervious surface and identified, this is a drainage area number 1. which drains towards the street and the drainage channel, which goes down toward the basins. What I had done is identified every single impervious surface within it, including with drainage area 2, which essentially drains toward this swale, which goes into lot number 12, which is going to be 12 city court, which is what we're doing here. And carefully I went through that, and then in the future conditions, it's the same sort of thing, for every single drainage area, 1.1, which is the driveway, which goes to the stormwater management area, 1.2, which is located here, 2.1, which is drains directly to the channel back here, and 2.2, which is also drains toward the channel, but it drains to it on 12 City Court. I'm just saying I went through a very detailed analysis of it, and I know I didn't share that in the stormwater report, but I think I'd like to have the opportunity to sit down with you, Aubrey, just sort of go over that. So, we're all on the same page with regard to the numbers. So, we can at least get that correct.
That's fine, that's fine. You want to be in the rest of this week, let me know what day you want to be.
Oh, that'd be fine, that'd be terrific. And the only other thing I think I'd like to discuss with you as well is the concept of gravel drive, as to whether or not that really should be counted as impervious or pervious. If only because, I think that guidance also from New York City DEP, from my own experience with them, is they consider, things like geogrid plastic, like invisible structures, gravel paved too, to be pervious. And in this case, this gravel trail doesn't get truck traffic, doesn't get vehicular traffic. It's just the occasional landscape going on. So it's something I'd like to be able to talk to you two about as well.
Well, DEC considers gravel impervious, and I have to represent DEC, I don't go by DEP. So that's gotta be included in your numbers.
Okay, so we can talk about that anyway, so that's fine, I understand. So it's something we'll work on. But
Wasn't there also,
that'd be terrific.
Alan, wasn't there also an alternative that I think Sabrina and Bob presented to you? Some sort of product, tough turf or something like this that might be able to get you further along the line here without impervious calculations?
Well, I'll discuss that with Jerry and see how we might go with plan.
Just to the chairman's point, when they did Surf Lane off of Broken Avenue, they used the same type of system you guys are using, Jerry, with the cones on the bottom, but they put grass on top, and it was used as an emergency access to one of the basins back in one of the lots, and it's still standing to this day, and it was on a very steep slope, so, just as a recommendation, guys, you can use tough turf, you can use that and put grass on top, and it works just as well. And then you wouldn't have to worry about the stormwater, and you wouldn't have to worry about the development coverage, so.
Yeah, but as it is now, just with the board's information, the coverage, you're looking at needing approval for an overage.
That's right. And that's even more of a reason, Serena, for them to use that tough turf.
Absolutely, so any way that you can try and reduce the need to go over the coverage, would be helpful for the board to understand.
That would help you out about 900 square feet.
Yeah.
Well, to look at,
I appreciate that, that sounds like something we definitely.
I had that very conversation with the owners today, are there any other alternatives we can consider, so we'll certainly look into that.
Yeah, go take a look at it too, when you
It's made by the same company, the same company that you're using with the gravel, they call it grass base, so it works very well.
Okay, we'll have a look.
Okay, we appreciate that advice.
Was it similarly steep, Bob?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
yes it was.
Something we should perhaps go see, Jerry.
Yeah, sure, okay. Good suggestion, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting us go through the diversion, that's important, because it touches on a lot of aspects of the project.
Yeah, good. Okay. Sabrina, any other comments?
No, I think that Jerry hit on all of my comments, he's gonna revise the coverage calculations information, based on Bob's finding. And we'll make sure that, we have exact numbers and understand if there is an overage, how much of an overage, which is important. And I think if you can balance that, as we just discussed, it would be helpful. And I agree with the pulling, redrawing the clearing grading limit line so that you can maintain those walls and, it is developed areas, so.
Good, makes good sense.
If you have no other comments.
Yep, great idea. Bob, did you have anything else to add in your comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Basically, number one, regarding the development coverages and the subcatchment and the impervious that Ellen and I have a little disagreement on, we'll meet on that. That's number one, no problem. Number two, with the water quality volume, which has to do with the same type of imperviousness, Alan and I will discuss that and be on the same page. Number three, Alan, I noticed you did not perform deep test holes, so those have to be done in accordance with Appendix D, DEC. The drill, call up Terry, give us a map, give us a sketch, have them go out there and take a look at it. We need to know what they are to make certain we have proper separation distance to the bottom of the dry wells, to the top of water and ground or ledge rock. So that's three, that's important. Number five, standard, since we're disturbing more than 5,000 square feet east of the watershed, we'll have to get coverage under the speedy storm permit of 20001. That's number four. Number five, basically they're constructing two types of walls. One's a reinforced concrete wall, 80 feet long, and one's older walls. They have to be all designed with, by a structural engineer and signed off. There's notes that we always like to see on the structural plans, which are in 6, 1, 2, and 3. 7 is having to do with clearing and grading, whatever the planning board decides upon. I would just recommend that they do prepare a declaration that the applicant signs, gets filed in the county, Westchester County Clerk's Office. That's number 7. 8 is a requirement of Westchester County Department of Health with a septic tank. I believe Stephen had that in memo 2 as well. And 9A through K are all notes that should be put on not only Jerry's plan, but I would highly recommend they put on Alan's plan too, the stormwater management plans as well. And those are my comments for tonight, Chairman.
Great, thank you, Bob. Dennis, you had comments about all these invasives.
I'm an inconvenient truth, I know.
Yeah, a mile a minute in the Forsythia.
So,
These are hateful.
I know. So I know that there was consideration, I understand if based on the design for the tree removal permit, if that one tree, about 20 inches needs to come down, obviously their planting is exceeding numerically, what those requirements would be for replacement under 121.6. My general comments to the plan were just sort of notation and or clarification oriented, so we could probably work through those fairly easily. I just thought in consideration of, obviously there's a mix of native and non-native plant species proposed, and I'm not using non-native in this sort of negative pejorative way, because I understand that there's going to be, a pool planting and a landscaping associated with that. I just feel that maybe those species wouldn't be appropriate in the restoration areas, so that was sort of the line in the sand that I was recommending. I was a little surprised. I know it's in Westchester, so I'm not saying that, you introduced this, but I don't see mile a minute that often, so when I saw it, I said, this is something obviously you guys are going to want to take care of, because, you're going to have you have a good plan, you're going to put in all these great plants, and you certainly don't want to, leave that lying around to potentially impact your planting. So the recommendation that I have made is obviously, they're still going through the application process, but I think it's important that if they're, considering following through on this, there's nothing wrong with getting started on this now just to get rid of this species. And that's both in the area that they're planting, and, unfortunately, nature doesn't recognize the lines that we draw all over the place. So any stands that are, nearby also should be, taken care of as well. Again, in consideration of that concept of restoration, when you look at the aerials of the area, like in 2018, before any houses were built, it just looks like one big deciduous forest. So I know that a lot of forests areas in Westchester, because of deer pressure, that we really have no understory species. So I appreciated what you were trying to do with sort of, adding structure vertically, to those, environs, but I still think just from walking the property, there is room to just consider a couple of the, canopy species in some locations. And, it looks like the area, I just mentioned sugar maple because, not only is photo period requirements, but obviously there's a lot of sugar maples there, so it seems to be doing, okay as a species. And then the last item was just something I had noticed. It's a fairly large swale back there, and, obviously some of the pile timber and whatnot, isn't impacting. So I'm not suggesting that everything needs to be removed, but it seems like some of it is cascaded into the easement, and, that really should just be kept clear for obvious reasons. So that was just something I pointed out, in terms of just a maintenance and a practice moving forward. And that's it for my comments, Mr. Chairman.
Good, very good. Any problems or issues with those, Jerry?
No, I'd like to suggest that perhaps I could meet Dennis at the site and just go over some of the stuff to make sure we're on the same page, and then we'll get everything updated, but we think they're all good comments.
Good. I really want to support his notion on these, the canopy trees, the larger ones. I think that's really important, to have a balance between the understory and the canopy trees, to restore what we used to have there. It's very important. Good. Well, I guess it's now up to you guys to come back with some revisions, and then we'll go from there. Unless there's some sort of disagreement, I mean, really fundamental disagreement between staff and the applicant, is it reasonable to expect that we'll have this information, it'll be compliant with the comments, and perhaps we can schedule a public hearing for you? It's a leap of faith for us, but it is coming up to July, and then we disappear until September.
Is there an urgency to get this resolved before the end of the, before the end of July?
There's a question too.
Well, I think the owners would like to be in a position, to start as soon as possible. We can certainly try to get it in the when. Well, I guess the question I have to ask is when would be the meeting and when would we have to get all this stuff done by to see how practical that is.
Well, we meet
So we would be looking at the second meeting in July.
the July 18th meeting.
It's July 18th with a submission deadline of June 26th.
And if the intention is to finish up by the end of, as soon as possible, the question is, based on the revised information, if there is a reduction in the development coverage, would you want a draft resolution, where we can just amend it based on the board's feeling of where we are at that point?
I think in the best of all worlds, that would be helpful to the applicant. I think unless others are uncomfortable with the revisions in clearing and grading limit lines, I think they work. I think as long as they comply with Bob's comments and your comments, Sabrina, and Dennis's comments, which I'm hearing that they're taking these suggestions seriously and we'll work these things out. I hate to, tie them up for another month and a half unnecessarily.
We'll certainly shoot for that submission date of June 26th. I think we can probably get it done. I know Alan and I both have a lot of stuff catching up to do with Bob and Dennis, but let's try it.
So I guess we have to notice the public hearing at this point then, Jennifer and Sabrina?
Yes. To notice the public hearing and staff to draft a resolution.
Yeah, so.
So we can say that the public hearing is scheduled for July, whatever that second meeting date is. Provided that the applicant meets the submission deadline of June 26th. If the applicant doesn't meet that, then the public hearing won't be noticed for that date.
Perfect. Okay, sound good?
Yep.
Okay, sound reasonable?
Yep.
Okay, So we leave it to you, hopefully you can, find time to get it done and we'll take it from there.
Do you wanna do
Okay,
a
thank you
motion
very
about
much.
the resolution?
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah, do we need a do we need a motion for the resolution?
I was just gonna ask, just to be clear, do you want a resolution for that meeting as well?
We're jumping way ahead, of course, we don't have the information for the deadline, so why don't we take that up on our, we can take it up on our July 5th meeting and see where we are. No?
No, we have to, no, we would have to put it on as an agenda item. I think that, in my view, right now, there's no harm in requesting a draft resolution because we amend that resolution at the July 18th meeting
Right.
or
Or not adopt, yeah, just because we prepare draft resolution doesn't mean that you have to act on it that night. You can defer action on it if you feel you're not ready to move forward, but it's there in case you are ready to move forward.
Okay, so is there a motion to direct staff to prepare a resolution for the July 18th meeting?
Motion.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. The table is set for you.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Good night.
yep, good
Good
night.
night.
Okay, next item is we have minutes of May 16. Did anyone have any questions on the minutes? If not, is there a motion to adopt the minutes?
Motion.
Second,
Second.
all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion carried.
Oh, wait a minute, I think Mr. Brownell has something.
Oh, hi, Dick, did you have a question? You're muted, Dick. Can't hear you. Nope.
Can you hear us, Dick? Yes, he can hear us.
We can't hear you,
We can't hear you. Did you check your microphone?
I think when he switches on, he has to accept video call.
Yeah, I bet that's it.
I guess he does
Turn
that.
his audio on when he gets online.
Yeah.
Just doesn't know how to do it.
So, Dick, if you had a couple of changes that were wordsmithing, if you wanna,
Check in with them.
work with Felicia on those directly, it's perfectly fine. And the motion, I guess, we can amend it just to say as amended.
Think you can type
Yeah,
into the,
I don't, okay. All right,
oh, he's typing.
the next item is a discussion item. This is the NG0 Legislature 50 North Greeley. We wanted to talk about threshold design concerns and the proposed legislation. You know, we've been talking about this a little bit for several weeks. We thought it was important, we've expressed this a number of times, we thought it was important to incorporate some design issues or design concerns. And rather than talking around them, we thought it might be helpful for all parties, applicant, town board, ARB, all interested parties and members of the public, if we articulated some of the concerns that we have with the legislation and also with regard to the specific proposal that's before the town board. So again, we're not redesigning the application, we're not holding up the application. What it is we've talked about some concerns about policy, and the policy that I think we all support is working for a walkable and vibrant downtown. And there were some concerns from members of the planning board with regard to some aspects of the current design that we felt either compromised those goals or frustrated those, and perhaps needlessly. So anyway, we want to talk about some of these design issues and get this information out in advance so that people weren't saying, well, what are you talking about? This is what we're talking about. So I know Tom has got a number of thoughts on this. I'll turn it over to Tom right now. He's brought a whole library in here,
Yeah,
which I trust he's not going to read to us tonight.
settle in.
Settle in, right? But I think it's really important that we do this. I think one of the most important functions that we have here is to help out applicants, the town board, on this, and of course, making certain that it's not frustrating that overall goal, and of course not frustrating what ought to be, one might say, the vision for North Greeley. So anyway, I have specific concerns on infrastructure, which I'll talk about later, but anyway, we'll go around the table so everyone can talk about issues and concerns.
Yeah, so I took a stab at which I'm gonna read through real quick just to go through it real quick, and then we can come back and discuss it. But before I do that, what really sort of stimulated this concern is that I think there's a feeling, and I think it's a warranted feeling, that somehow we're missing something in the process here. And what seems to be missing in the process is that the town has accepted a proposer, initiator, a petitioner to change the zoning for a significant piece of property in his interest, which he has the right to do, obviously. And I don't think that anybody would suggest that that's a bad thing. But what has happened, the process has been one in which the petitioner has actually drafted the zoning text proposal. And that's the one that we're working with. And the concern I have is that throughout, I don't know how long we've been talking about, well, what do we do about downtown Chappaqua? What do we do to make it better? What are people's aspirations? And we've been through some tough times in trying to address that question. And we never really, it seems as though the town board has never really focused in and said, this is what we want to do specifically with regard to North Greeley. And as a consequence, since there's no vision, at least that I have heard articulated, to use as a context for deciding what to do, deciding how one should accept and work with this person who has made the initiative to ask for zoning. There's no context for the decision making here that guides us. It seems as though everything is sort of retroactive, that actually it feels as though it's been deferred to, the vision has been deferred to the initiator rather than the town leading in the process. And I think, and I think the planning board thinks, that it's the town's goal to lead in the process, especially for such a big piece of property. Now, I have to admit, if it turned out that the initiative and the design that has been proposed in the context of that zoning text initiative, if I thought it was a good thing for the town, I wouldn't be concerned. I wouldn't be, involved at this level trying to figure out, what the right thing to do is, because I think the right process would have been used in order to come to a decision. Doesn't mean I necessarily have to agree with that decision, but at least there would have been a process that got us there, that focused on what the public interest is. And so far, the public interest, as I've seen it articulated, is we need lots of housing, and we need, when we do housing, when we do this development, it needs to be environmentally responsible. Those are all good things. There's nothing wrong with those things, except that there's a void in the other side of the equation of what more should we be doing here other than having multifamily housing that's done in a responsible way. And there's just a lot more to talk about. There's just a lot more to be looked at. And so we've been talking about this for quite a while. We've been sending memos to the town board. We've been in work sessions with the town board. We've articulated this over and over and over again. And I haven't seen yet or heard yet, I'm not privy to all the conversations, but it hasn't come back at us we are considering this, let's talk about this, these are important issues. And so I think it's time for the planning board to lean in a little bit harder here, to lean in and say, look, we are responsible for this as well. The state mandates us to do this, and it's in the town code that we have the responsibility, the authority anyway, and once you get the authority, I think you have the responsibility to do independent studies of any particular issue that relates to planning or development. This is the biggest planning and development issue in front of the town right now, and it's going to have significant impacts. So I thought that it would be helpful to get that conversation going, to actually be so bold as to draft up some zoning text that might actually be considered to be put in the draft legislation that is being proposed. And it's really not a lot. It's pretty significant in terms of its, I think it's significant in terms of its outcomes. But it's just a little bit more than a page of text that could, I think, easily be put into the legislation. What's important though, in order to even consider this, is the town board, we need to sit down and decide what we want North Greeley to be. And that's the context for this particular suggestion. I happen to think that North Greeley has the opportunity not to be retail everywhere, not to be just housing everywhere, but to be a great little town street where people actually live on the street and active, all of those things that walkable, all of those things that have been talked about for years about what we ought to be doing there. But I don't see an evidence in the initiative that's happening right now. So this is an attempt to sort of get that in the conversation. And the town board may think it's a little aggressive because I'm actually making, and maybe we feel it's a little aggressive because I'm actually making suggestions about what they delete from the legislation and what they put in. But I'm gonna read through it real quick so that we can all understand it. I think maybe the first time anybody's seen this, and I don't think that Con has a copy of it.
Before you read it, can I add two things why I think it's important to have this conversation and why I think it's important to address the zoning specifically? One, we've talked about this, but the zoning is critical for this site specifically because we can't guarantee that this applicant will develop the property. Any number of things could happen. We could have the public hearing open for 6 months or a year or 2 years and the market could change and the desire to develop it could change. So the zoning will stay, whereas the development plan may not. And so the zoning matters for that purpose. And so getting the zoning right, it matters for this site specifically and also reflects our values as a town and a planning. Secondly, the zoning matters beyond just this site because it is such a significant proposal in our town and some might disagree, and we've talked about this from day one, but inevitably, this does set a precedent. North Greeley is a corridor that is inviting development. I love that there's a proposal to develop a significant portion of North Greeley, but we cannot look at this site completely in a vacuum. And so the zoning that we apply to this site and the concepts behind it, not necessarily the specific details of the height or the number of stories or the number of parking, but the concepts, which is what you're trying to address in some of this and what a lot of this literature is about, is sort of the values and the concepts that we hold as important to us. And so it matters for this site and it matters beyond just this site. So I know that we are talking to each other and we've been having this conversation since the very first time that this came before this board, but it matters and I'm happy to have this conversation.
And I think before Tom reads this, I think it's really important to have this conversation because we have something else that's coming up that's, and you and Tom will be working, on the work, what's it called, the task force? Working group. And I know you guys are scheduled to meet, I think, this Thursday. So it's important, I think, that you are able to capture as much of the feedback from the planning board as a board Not that there's necessarily unanimity on every issue, but I think it's very important that we carry this forward as a board and get this information to them. And the information that you've articulated already, the importance of the zoning. I hope you emphasize that again at that meeting because it's so critically important. Yes, it reflects our values, but it's the not the permanence, but it's the impact, the long-term impact of the zoning that is critically important. It sets the stage, and it's got to reflect our values, our vision. So this is terrific, and again, the timing is very important because you have this meeting on June 8th.
Yep, Thursday.
Good. Anyway.
You reference this pile of books. That's actually it just came off my shelves at home, and it's what I could fit in the suitcase. There's more.
Just
But
the tip of the iceberg.
it looks like a stunt, and I guess it is a stunt. I mean, I admit it's a stunt. But the reason I did it, this is, I mean, there's Vincent Scully's in here, there's William H. White, there's Jane Jacobs, there's Peter Calthorpe, there's like all of the really deep thinkers, real experienced professionals on the subject of how you build a townscape. And this body of work is the source and the foundation for the great towns that we have. It's indicative of the tradition that's out there of how you do this. And the reason I brought it is because I was in a meeting in one of our work sessions, and one of the town board members said, I think there's a problem with this project. And she said, well, that's your opinion. There is someone who lives up on King Street who likes the project. And I felt like all of a sudden we were picking ice cream flavors at Baskin Robbins. This is more serious than that. And this is the seriousness of this endeavor. And this stuff matters. It matters, and it's proven to work. And so a lot of this is sort of the principles of which are in this text that I'm gonna go ahead and read real quick. I'm gonna not read the introduction. I mean, I guess I could, but well, maybe we will. The planning board submits the following amendment requested to the project special permit draft legislation dated March 10th. We do so by your referral and by our obligation in the state of New York statute and in the Newcastle Code to play a leading role in matters of planning and development in our town. We support the entire purpose and intent of the legislation as stated in the current draft. But most importantly, at this juncture, we feel the text falls short in promoting, quote, a walkable and vibrant downtown, which is in their intent section. In addition, while we recognize the town board's authority to determine the application review process, we continue to urge the town board to leave site plan approval where it is best placed for the best results, in the hands of your well-qualified and properly mandated planning board. Our comments are offered in the spirit of cooperation and desire to arrive at the best outcomes for the North Greeley neighborhood and for the people of Newcastle. To that end, we look forward to discussion with the entire town board during the current public comment period. And so here are some suggestions how the text could be changed. Off-street parking and loading, there's a provision for on-site car sharing. I think that many of us feel that that's we're skeptical that that's a solution to a parking problem, and we would rather that it not be in there. All residential parking pursuant to Schedule 9 shall be provided on-site. In other words, residential parking may not be provided off-site for the people who actually live there. On the design section, the maximum building height should not exceed blank stories or blank feet. We think that this is still should be a matter of debate and discussion. It's a critical item. With the additional provision for roof parapets, minimum reasonable height for roof construction. E2, the building street wall above the third floor of the building shall set back a minimum of 10 feet from the frontage street wall lot line. E3, this is under the design section number 14, ground floor uses within 25 feet of the street wall shall be restricted to principal uses of the special permit, i.e. retail and residential tenancies, tenant common areas, and building lobby entrances with provision for access drives not to exceed 22 feet in width total to parking. Building mechanical spaces, storage areas, food service, back of house facilities, and parking are not to be allowed within this 25-foot zone. Windows of interior facing habitable rooms shall be no less than 50 feet apart. That might need some explanation, discussion. Another one, E5, building street wall shall occupy a minimum of 75% and a maximum of 85% of the frontage within 10 feet of the lot line. And then there's a little section on the procedure, and this I think is critically important. We'd like to revise the last paragraph, and essentially it is, we would like to have the text say that the site plan review authority be in the hands of the planning board and not the town board. I think that that's where it's properly placed. So I read over those real quick so that we would all understand, you know, what's in here, and anybody have any comments? I'm sure that they do about what we think we should be doing here.
Certainly have questions and comments. This is new
Yes,
to me,
yes.
so
It was new as of yesterday to me too.
so very much appreciate the the effort and the initiative. I think yes, you have a little stunt here, but it would be helpful, I think, maybe to talk a little bit about your proposed changes here and how they promote what you're trying to get at from the literature that that is sort of based in years of study. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, how it how these changes get at what you're trying to get at here. And I do have a couple just specific questions, or maybe more technical questions about the specific language here. One, when it comes to the off-street parking and loading, you say delete the on-site car sharing. I think I agree with that. It's not that they can't do on-site car sharing, it's just that why are we requiring it here, right? Is that what you're suggesting?
I guess what I'm suggesting is that you could have it, but not in place of required one parking space for every unit.
Right, 1-to-1. With 1-to-1 is already a reduction in our parking as it is now.
Right. And that would
And
be the baseline.
yeah, so I'm
Maybe that needs to be,
I'm comfortable with that. I just wanted to clarify. That's fine with me. And on-site car sharing can exist, but not as a replacement necessarily for the 1-to-1.
It's just my feeling it didn't belong in zoning.
Yes, and the 1-to-1 space per 1 unit is a reduction from our code as it stands, a reduction that I am personally comfortable with. I've said so previously, and it's I understand why it might be a concern to some in our town, but I'm comfortable with it. But so that makes sense to me. The question of height and stories,
Well, can I go back to the parking though, just for a second? Which I think is interesting is, and I think it's correct. It's worded, I think, the way zoning should be worded, and that is all residential parking pursuant to Schedule 9 shall be provided on site. That really doesn't tell us necessarily it's 1-to-1, that it's a reduction, or it might be less than 1-to-1, but I think whatever it is that we determine is necessary for residential parking for this proposal, or this area, it leaves it open, because again, my way of thinking, we haven't had the benefit of a parking study. We don't have that information. So it's something that it seems to me like it's a flag holder. It says, we're cognizant of this, and by the way, depending upon what the town board determines, it may be less than 1-to-1, it may be 1.33, just like the others, whatever it might be. But I think it's important to have it in this kind of language. I mean, my understanding on zoning is it should be somewhat generic, enabling, it's enabling legislation, and it's not a substitute of government saying this is what you will do. So I would like to leave flexibility to both, the powers that be in terms of the building department to have some flexibility, as well as the applicant. So I like it like this, because it doesn't say it will be 1-to-1 or 1.25 to 1 or 0.9. Leave it this way. I like it like this. That's my personal feel on it.
But isn't that adding, I mean, if you're trying to resolve things here, is this helpful? That's the point I have to make, is this is a standing issue, we know it.
Mhm.
It's not gonna get resolved. And at the same time, we're saying we're okay with this we're commenting on this legislature, we're okay with this development, given all these other points we have. Putting in something that is that broad isn't resolving the issue of parking, in my opinion, right? Like, either we have to say, we have a stance on it, 1:1 is fine, or 1:3, 1.1, 1.33 is fine, or 1.25 is fine, whatever it is that we wanna say. I just feel like this is just keeping us where we are, and that's not really moving something forward, and
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
and that's what their feedback to us is. If I was to see it as, just as trying to be neutral, I feel like the town board keeps saying, we wanna move this along, and so I'm just wondering if there's a way for us to be helpful there.
Well, I think it does something that's actually very important, and that is, this language actually eliminates the whole discussion, and it's not here. And what it implies is that commercial is off-site. So that had been a problem, and I think it had been a real sticking problem. And I think by implication, it's now saying it's not going to be an issue for this applicant or this area. Commercial parking will be taken care of presumably, it could be on onsite, but it could be also, it's gonna be off-site. So we've taken that off the table, which I think is actually really a big thing. And actually leads to a little bit more clarification, less confusion, less acrimony and problems. But I agree with you, and
Maybe we should state that. I mean, if we're okay with it, we should state it, I think.
well, I don't know how you state that in zoning. In other words, you say, and by the way, we don't have to worry about commercial parking.
If
Put that
you,
in zoning legislation.
you could do that. You could say for this particular site, you don't have to, the only parking that is required is for the residential, and just leave the commercial off the table.
Which is what I think this does.
No, but just,
Maybe not,
no, you can, but
but it needs to be, sorry, go ahead.
to be clear, I mean, you are suggesting very specific changes. There's the rest of the legislation that is not in this sheet
Correct.
here. And in the rest of the legislation, I mean, look, there is a commercial parking requirement that exists today that needs to be addressed one way or another. If we don't address it, then they cannot develop what they are proposing. Not that I'm suggesting we have to allow that or not allow that, but it does need to be addressed.
I agree, but I think that for me, I think that will get resolved one way or another through the process. I'm less concerned how it gets resolved. My suggestion would be, there's a request of the town that the developer provide a diner. That's 10 spaces per 1,000 square foot. And so it seems to me that if the town is going to ask for a diner, and the developer really doesn't wanna do one, but he's going to do a diner, the town maybe has the obligation, or maybe not the obligation, but should help him by finding parking space in town for that extra increment of parking. Maybe not all, maybe not all of it, but some of it. And the frustration I have, that I think maybe most of us do, we've been talking about parking in this district since before the cows came home. And the problem is that nobody does it's not, this isn't rocket science, I promise you. We know how many spaces there are out there, we know how many cars are using those spaces, we know what the difference is between the spaces that are used and spaces that aren't used, and actually there are, I think, something like 60 to 80 spaces out there that on a typical day are not used. that's a number that you can work with. But nobody wants to, in the planning department, the development department, we've asked, nobody wants to sit down and do that simple math and bring that to the table. And instead, it's just write an RFP to get a parking consultant. It's time to build. It really is time to build, and it's time to build right without, as far as I'm concerned, without spinning around these questions of, what about this and what about that? The answers are there on the table. We just have to pick them up and look at them. And so, when it comes to parking, I happen to think that there's a solution to be massaged, whether it's using the parking district or using, whatever devices might be. I thought that Lisa had a great idea. Let's take those spaces which are closest to the shopping area. I think she said there were 100 of them around the train station, and let's convert those to parking for retail. I thought that was a terrific idea. And all of a sudden, somehow that just, maybe it's coming back, but somehow it just sort of drifted into the ether again. So I think there's a solution there.
I agree there's a solution there.
But Eldad, you're correct. You are correct because the proposed legislation does have language in there dealing with commercial. So unless we take that out or address it, just putting in this one line as a substitute is not necessarily a substitute. So it needs a little, this is an issue that we can talk about, but obviously it's not going to resolve it. But I think we have to be careful as we go through this to see how it dovetails with the balance of the document. But I personally like the fact that it deals with this in this kind of generic, broader language level. If I would, if I wanted to, I'd sit here and say, well, all residential parking, including guest parking, because that has not been addressed at all throughout this process. Residential guests coming to stay, where are they gonna stay? So I think all residential parking, as far as I'm concerned, could incorporate all that when we finally get our information for the solution for the parking at this level.
If I may,
Sure.
My guess is that us saying it's a problem, but there is a solution, and we know the solution, it's just,
We can't, thank you.
sorry, can you hear me?
It's on screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel like we're not addressing the urgency that they keep the town board is sort of bringing back again and again to us. And we're punting it back, I feel, and I know what you're saying, we cannot give you a clear solution because we don't have the facts in front of us, right? But this is my whole problem about we're saying something that we've said at least 10 times over. So either we've got to say something different or we've got to stop saying it. That's my opinion. I understand it's a very fundamental issue. It matters that we address it. But all I'm saying is we've been saying this for quite a few months. So if we want to be heard, I feel like we have to give them something more than. That's my point and my frustration.
No, I understand your frustration. Boy, do I understand it. But at the same time, I don't think it's our job to answer every question. And the question of the retail parking, commercial parking, parking for guests, that is a big question that needs to be addressed. It seems to me that somewhere along the line, they will address that. And for us to address it is gonna tie us up to the point where we are held up in doing anything for them. My thought was, let's focus on the things that we care most about. And I think that the thing we care most about for parking is that we wanna be sure that the people who live there can park there.
Okay, that's.
And that would be, a fundamental baseline, and all the rest of it,
It's on them.
would be on them, not us to
That's
resolve
fair.
now.
I mean,
I think that Bob brings up a really good point, that doesn't necessarily, it's not really realistic when it comes to especially guest parking. I happen to think that retail parking but if I don't know, if we can make suggestions about that, in notes that we send them,
But we have already.
that we have. Yeah,
So I think all the points are valid. I think that the suggestion that you're making here, Tom, makes sense to me. I also just wanna be realistic that there is a proposal on the table both for residential and commercial parking. The residential is a reduction of 1-to-1 spaces, that's the proposal as it stands. The commercial is a certain amount on site with the rest to be to be satisfied off-site. I personally
I am too.
am comfortable with both of those proposals. Your change in language here is completely acceptable to me.
well, maybe it doesn't have to be in here, because I think that it's probably pretty logical that maybe I'm wrong, but I thought that logical that they would do that a minimum of 1-to-1. But then this on-site car sharing seems to be still flying around here, which sounds like could be a proposal to switch out some spaces for some shared parking
Yeah,
spaces
and
for
I-
car sharing.
I
So-
You're
agree.
saying it's less than 1:1, and this is a way to sort of accommodate for that
Yes.
probably.
Yeah, that was my thought.
I thought as part of the justification to reduce it from the 1 point, whatever the current ratio is,
Yeah.
1.3 to 1 is one of the elements to point toward to justify the reduction down to 1,
Right.
1-to-1.
Oh,
That's a way
down to 1-to-1.
Yeah, I think it's already
Interesting.
implicitly part of the formula that was part of the thinking, along with other suppositions, which again,
Wow.
I'm fairly uncomfortable with.
Yeah.
Because I haven't seen the justification and the figures on it. I'm absolutely convincible that it could be fine, but based on my gut on the way people operate in this town and the geometry of this town and the proximity of services to this proposed location, I think this presumption that people will not need cars is ill-founded. I think it's
Yeah, I mean, I agree that not having cars is not an option, but 1:1 is something I could get behind. Just based on, I mean, if I were to just put myself in that situation, I can say, we have 2 cars, but we literally have 1 functional car right now.
Mhm.
And every time I think about it, I feel like our lifestyles have changed to the point that we could do with 1 car. Is it permanent? I'm not so sure. But given where it is and the location it's at, if that's the sticking point, I'm okay to get behind it. I also think that we don't necessarily have to get around saying on-site car sharing as a,
yeah.
we don't need to
I
find
agree.
these gimmicks.
I
Like
agree.
we
Yeah.
can state what we want
Yep.
without really
I
having
think
to
that's
get around.
I think that's important too.
Yeah.
That's why I like the elimination of the car sharing, because
Sure.
it's not zoning to me. It makes no sense. If it's there, that's terrific. You wanna do it, terrific. You wanna do 3, you wanna do 10,
If we're not careful, we're wandering into the parking toolbox again. We don't wanna do that.
Yeah, and it's like the on-site car sharing, if this really is a concept that the town wants to get behind, it needs to be a bigger thing. Like it makes sense if it was car sharing, sitting in the public parking lots to be used for, like, I use a car because I get off the train and I'm gonna return it within 2 hours, right? Because I'm getting off the train, taking that car, going home and dropping it back or whatever, right? Like talking about it for some one property doesn't make sense to me personally.
Interesting, good. Okay, do we beat up for parking enough?
It's everybody's favorite topic.
Well, not really. It's we talk about it a lot, but I think it's actually our least favorite subject.
Everybody talks about the weather, nobody does anything about it.
Yeah, exactly right. But I mean, I think the design issues that you've got here are actually far more interesting. And again, C, I don't think we can resolve that necessarily. Why don't you talk about, E and E2, E3 and
Those street
E4,
wall stuff,
yes,
yeah,
I mean,
ground floor
yes,
uses.
the street issues.
Well, I mean, it should be obvious to everybody who walks through a town, walks through a city, that you walk down a street where there's nothing going on because there's, parking garages or loading docks. It's not a street you wanna walk on. I mean, it's just that simple. You walk down a street where there are front doors to people's homes, or there are front doors to stores, or there are restaurants. Those are the streets that people are walking on, not the other streets. People avoid those other streets because they wanna be walking on the streets where people are. And it's a fundamental principle that people want to be where people are. And that has been true forever. And there, William H. White, I mean, he was the guru on public spaces and how to do them right, and with actual scientific studies making this point. So it seems to me that if we want to have a street where people are, because we want it to be active, we have to make a street, we want to make a street where people will go, we have to make a street where people are, not where people aren't. And as a consequence, what you put on the street, the land uses, the uses you put on the ground floor are fundamentally important to achieving that. And it's not just the building faces and the doorways into these things. And Jane Jacobs is brilliant about this. The doorways into these things and the activity and the communication, the visual communication, the social communication between the sidewalk and what goes on behind the wall. It's has to do also with the quality of the public space that people are in when they are there. And if you can provide public spaces for people to sit, for example, and do it in a way that attract people, then you have something where you are adding to that formula in a very, very powerful way. This is what sidewalk restaurants do for us. This is what Susan Lawrence, it's great. I mean, you go over there, every time I go over there, even though weather's not so great, there's at least one or two people sitting in that sidewalk, on that sidewalk. And that adds everything to the street. And there's a trick to this. If you put a restaurant, a sidewalk restaurant, and for people to go outside and eat, you put some park benches next to that, you will have people sitting on the park benches, not eating, but sitting on the park benches because that's where the people are. And it's like leveraging all of these things to make something which could be really, really special in town. And what I see when I look at and I have looked at these drawings over and over and over again, and I don't see on the ground floor, I don't see any of that except for the corner where the diner is. I see a parking garage, I see bicycle racks for like 160, 170 linear feet of the development. That is a killer for the street. People are not going to want to walk there, people are not going to go there. So the ground floor uses, which I think is E3 here, specifically mandates that we have those things that people living on the street, stores on the street, tenant common areas on the street, building lobby entrances on the street. And we gotta have provision for parking to get people to the parking, that's true. But all those things should be mandated in this code, and let's do it now. Let's not have fights with the developer when he comes in for an application, because we on this board know that you get to a point sometimes in an application and you're trapped. And it ends up being just if you can convince the person to do it instead of mandating the person to do it. We need to mandate the things that we think are going to make this a great neighborhood, a great street in town, rather than not doing it and fighting ourselves uphill when the application comes in. So the thing specifically that I would say that should not be here and should be in the code, building mechanical spaces, storage areas, food service, back of house facilities, and parking are not allowed in what I'm suggesting is a 25-foot deep zone, which is a deep enough zone to have a studio housing unit, a one-bedroom unit. If you look at the plans for the project, the units are about 25 feet deep. Even the one bedrooms are 25 feet deep. So in that zone, you could put a row residential units with front doors and windows looking out onto the street and activate the street that way and have the parking behind it, have the building mechanical behind it, have all those things which are service spaces behind where the people are gonna be on the street, should be on the street. So that's the intent of that. Now, the numbers may be 20 feet, 30 feet, I don't know, but that's the principle behind that one.
And I would support that wholeheartedly. I think the only thing we have to sort of grapple with is, again, how does the parking, I mean, how are you gonna accommodate this and the parking? And if it doesn't, are we willing to say, we would rather have this over the parking? And that's my question.
Just to answer that question, that's why I think zoning is important. We're putting forward our values, what's important to us. I completely agree with essentially the idea of activating the ground floor, making sure that there's an active ground floor, Jane Jacobs' eyes on the street, all of that, people, activity. If that proposal, whatever the number is, were to cause a situation where it was in conflict with the developability of this site, then a proposal could come and ask for a variance from that and they could speak to how they could still get around and still meet our, the purpose and intent of that zoning language. But I don't think, but that's, it's a question of like the tail wagging the dog, right? I am wholeheartedly supportive of the concepts in E3. Agreed that I don't know if 25 feet is the right number or not, but the idea of an active ground floor use is critical. The only thing I would add to it, and it's a question, is the concept of glazing. Do we want to have some kind of minimum requirement of windows as opposed to just opaque walls?
Like operable when
Not necessarily operable, but the idea that you can see in so that is even more of an interaction between the use and the street.
So I think that's a really important consideration, and it gets to, I think part of the formula there is the use
the
that's
use be.
behind it.
Sure, if it's residential, then I wouldn't put a glazing requirement. But if
That's gonna happen anyway.
Well, there's gonna be a minimum of
You have to by
yes,
code, right?
but I'm just saying if there's a commercial use, and it doesn't mean everything needs to be glass.
Right.
But I would wanna make sure, the reason I raise it is it's not my idea. I've seen it in other zoning codes elsewhere, where there's a requirement for both a minimum linear or percentage of glazing and also sometimes a height as well, but I don't know exactly what the right number is, but there might be, it might benefit and be in service of the ultimate purpose of this specific language, which is to further activate and people wanna be where people are. And so the idea of kind of the interaction between the use and the sidewalk and the street, I think could benefit from that.
I think it's important to be clear. These are, our tenets, these are the values that we are looking at and that we're presenting. I think it's also important when you guys meet on Thursday to unfortunately specifically state where the current proposal falls short of these guidelines. And that to me is critically important. I'm not sitting here trying to redesign something for someone, but the main entrance to this building is on that alley right close to Sarah Lawrence.
Yep.
So it makes no sense to me. Why is it not on the front? Why is it not in the street where people have to walk to it? As Thomas pointed out, I don't know what the linear feet footage is, but we have a considerable amount of space that it's occupied with mechanicals and bike racks, and most importantly, parking. It is a parking garage on the first floor. That's not conducive to a vibrant, so I think this is one thing, but I think you almost have to sort of shock people a little bit and say, by the way, these are the good things, and this is why we think it's so critical that we talk to you at this point, because here are some shortfalls. You need to be aware of these. It's not that we think we can design better and we're smarter, or this, we don't like the way this looks, or we do like the way it looks. It's counter to basic tenets. This is not new rocket science that we're creating. They're out there. This has been it's part of the literature. It's part of the deal. So I think that's really important. I mean, some folks may not like that. I'm sure the applicant may not like that, but I think it's critically important at this stage to draw attention to those shortfalls.
May I suggest one thing, because I know you're gonna hit against that right away. This is so important to us that I think it is to say that and the parking requirement almost from two sides of our mouth is just not gonna help our point. If we're gonna stick to the asking for the design requirements, which I would wholeheartedly support, we should come up with some ideas in our head as to what we would be able to say in terms of reducing parking requirement, because that's what it's gonna come down to. Or it's gonna be reducing the number of units, basically. So, right?
It could.
Well, yeah, reducing the number of units is actually where eventually this gets to. I mean, because the reason, in my look at the
Sure.
drawings and the project,
Sure.
the reason the parking is on the street is because they
It's
have
too many.
56 units per acre. It was the only way to do it. And I think that the consequence of putting some of these things in place will be that you are not going to be able to get 45 units on the property. You're just not gonna be able to do it. And that's where, I mean, they could prove me wrong, but I can't see
Sure.
how to do it.
Yeah, that's.
So this is where we get back to our values. And how important is it to have as many units as we can, in the town, for us to have as many units as we can get? Or are we willing to balance the desire to have multifamily housing, which is a good thing, affordable housing or workforce housing, whatever you call it, which is a good thing, with a town which we want to live in,
Sure.
which is a good thing? And if in the balance, it's 35 units as opposed to 45 units or 38 or 30, well, that's what comes out of the wash when you're done.
Sure.
And those considerations should drive the unit count and consequently the amount of parking. You know how those things go together.
Sure,
You're always
absolutely.
balancing that on a site to see if you can make it work.
I hate to ask this, but I know, and I think we've gone over this time and time again. It's like, what's the resistance here? Because the design piece that we just talked about makes perfect sense in our head. The idea that we could do with less parking also makes sense to some extent, where we are, there is some middle ground. I'm just saying, is there a way for us to help them get to a middle ground so that we get, we're able to get to some of these basic tenets which are so important to us as a
Well,
board?
I think that ultimately, like any application, this is very different, in my view, been doing this a long time. This is very different because, the legislation's coming from the applicant, and the applicant's proposing their proposal. But it is not unusual to see an application come before us where an applicant seeks to maximize
Sure.
usage and return. That happens all the time. Whether it's a single family house and it's too large, it's got too much macadam or whatever it might be, to something like this. So I think it's no different. I think what so far is different here is, and I'm not sure why, but the resistance has been, as far as I can tell, that's just my opinion, has been, here's my application, here's my legislation, I want this and I want it this way and I want it, I have a deadline, I want it now. And this is very unusual. We don't normally have an application coming in that way where it is presumed to be perfect without the benefit of feedback from staff, from the building department, from the town board, from the planning board, from ARB. It's sort of audacious, frankly, that the presumption is, here it is. And I think our concern is that, my concern is that the legislation has been drawn to enable that. And I'm not so sure that, I think there are elements of that legislation that are over the top in some areas and other areas are insufficient. And I think our attempt here is just to draw attention to some of these issues and to alert people to say, not unusually, we gotta make some changes to this application. It happens all the time, like, do we have to bring Felix in here and tell us about the 16-year odyssey and all the changes he had to make? And others, I mean, we've had tough applications, the ZBA's had tough applications that have taken months and years. We had a planning board application that took over 20 years. And they finally abandoned it when we changed our wetland laws. So it's because it kept changing. So I think what we're suggesting is the applicant has a right to develop their property, and I think we support the tenets that are behind that initiative. But it may not be the right application.
Sure.
Because it's in conflict with, and this is why I think this is so good and so important. This is again generic, it's enabling legislation. We're not telling you where to put, or how many commercials, whatever. It's up to you, but this is what you gotta do. So I think it's appropriate to do it at that level. So I probably overstated things and get myself into more trouble, but that's my take on it. So I would like to see, and I haven't seen it yet, but I would love to see some sort of response from the applicant and support from the town board with us to say, it's not perfect, we'll work with you and we'll get it as close to perfect as we can, and you'll be proud of it, it will be successful. One of the issues I about this right now, as it's currently drawn up, because it doesn't, not only are these policies that are tenets that are important for our vision, they're also important for success of the application. If you don't do this, you're just gonna have this parking lot in front. You may have a problem here, and it may not be as successful as we all want it to be. So you are compromising even your chance for success in our estimation, because again, it's counter to these kinds of basic tenets. So we wanna help you to make sure it's successful, because if it's successful for us too.
So
Whole community.
There's an important distinction that where we are in the process, we don't have an applicant. We have somebody, a petitioner.
Sure.
And yes, the applicant has the right to develop the property under current zoning, and nobody would say he doesn't have the right to do it. I think that there's a problem there, because the zoning right now doesn't incentivize development because of the parking requirements and the height limit, and it's no wonder that that building's been sitting there that long. It's no wonder that the buildings across the street have been sitting there that long. It's because the zoning isn't in place to incentivize it. But he has the right to develop his property. He does not have the right to rezoning. He does not have the right to rezoning. That's a town action. He has the right to petition for it. But the town has the public responsibility to decide what's best for the town and act accordingly. And and that's what I think we're asking the town board to do, is to look at this for a moment, I think for from now on until they actually decide to act on zoning, to put the applicant's design aside, put it over here, because that actually should not be the conversation. The conversation, even though the applicant, the petitioner initiated the process, and I have a problem with the way that was done. I'm not saying it's not done that way all the time, it is, but the way in which the town has received it, I think is a problem. But put the design aside, put what will be the application aside, and deal with the public issue, with the public vision of what we want to have happen here. Realistically understanding that, well, we do want to develop it, but we want to develop it for the benefit of the town, and then have the applicant respond to the zoning which is in place, and then has the right to develop the property under that zoning, which will presumably be incentivized by a lot more development. That's the process that I think we ought to be going through. And the problem, I think, is that there has been this conflation between the zoning text and the development. And it looks as though, from the process, it looks to me as though the foregone conclusion is that when the zoning gets in place as written here, we are going to get that development.
Sure.
And to me, that's what calls into question Bob's, or asks the question that Bob is asking, shouldn't we be looking at the development? Shouldn't we be looking at the design and the planning to really understand what we're getting? Because we're gonna get that if we don't do something at the front end. And I think that's a legitimate thing to do. I think it's a necessary thing to do. It doesn't seem as though that's a conversation that is happening anywhere that I've seen, a real conversation about a critique, if you will. I mean, critique maybe is too hard a word, but I think that maybe we're gonna have to have some hard words here to really understand what we're getting. So everything that we're doing, that I think we ought to be looking at in the context of now looking at the design, because I didn't wanna have to look at that, but now we have to look at that because that's what we're gonna get, is done in the consequence, in the process of trying to figure out what we want, not what the developer wants, not what the property owner wants. We understand. I worked with these guys, not these particular guys, I worked for developers all my life, I get it. And had great relationships. I thought Felix was actually a really good relationship. But we have to put the town first. We have to put the town and the town's interest first. And in order to put a button on it, a pin on it, we need to look at the design, as Bob suggests, I think.
And I'm with you on that. I think the one thing I wanna sort of, what I was hearing, you had this conversation, I remember I was remote and listening in, and it seemed to me that the town board's saying, look, there's an urgency to change what that looks like. So, and what we're saying is, well, hold on a minute. I know there's an urgency, but that's not how we do it. We think about it, we do it, we do it sensibly. Here are the ways we've done it in the past. And I think that that is the biggest friction point right now, is our understanding of how we think this process must work and how they think it should be, because they just are in this path of like, we don't want that eyesore, this guy's gonna walk away, we want something, we want it quickly. So I'm just wondering if, and I understand what you're saying is, we need to be deliberate, we should not be cowing to this one person who comes along and says, I wanna develop this. But I'm just talking about what the town board is saying to us. And I wonder if there's a way for us to help get somewhere in the middle there,
So,
is my,
here's.
and I think you're going that direction.
No, we are.
Yeah.
Finally, we decided to step forward and say, okay, put this in the zoning text.
Sure.
Trying to sort of push the
Absolutely.
question. There is a work group that we're gonna be going to on Thursday night. And I think that I believe that we need to act quickly. I just do, because of all the things you just said. And it's kind of astonishing to me because this proposal first appeared apparently in town hall a year ago. And now all of a sudden, we have to rush through it, but that's okay, we're prepared to work with them, we want to work with them. And so I think that there's this meeting we're having on Thursday, but I think the way to get to what you are suggesting is to get in a meeting with the full boards, sitting down together and having the conversation. And being sure that we're listening to each other. In the end, they're gonna do what they're gonna do because they're the town board. But if we can have a conversation about it, an open conversation in some working group, maybe the ARB's involved, we've already put that request out. And we haven't heard back from them. And I don't know whether we should have expected to hear back from them after 10 days, but maybe they need to have a vote and they haven't met yet. They're having a working session tonight. I don't know if they need to have a vote in order to have a meeting with us. But I think if, maybe we ought to have our own special meeting on this soon, in the next week, where we are bringing in all the drawings that we have. We are bringing in all the ideas that we have. And as Bob says, look at the existing proposal to really understand, where this thing is going and how it could be better and the ways in which we are suggesting that the zoning be changed. And invite them, if they don't end up inviting us, let's invite them. say, we're gonna have a meeting, town board's invited, we want a joint meeting, we're gonna hold a meeting, it's gonna be our meeting, we're inviting you to our meeting. We can invite the ARB, I don't wanna put pressure on the ARB, maybe they are not ready to do that, but invite them and see if they're willing, maybe an informal appearance by them if they wanna come. You know, we can find that out in the meantime. But have the meeting, hey, get together and actually have a discussion about this with them.
Yeah, I think there's a dual, you speak to the urgency, but I think there's a dual urgency. Obviously, there's an articulated urgency on the part of the applicant, and I think the town board is sensitive to that, and I think they should be, and that's important. But I think at the same time, there's an urgency that may be qualitatively different, but it's an urgency on the part of the community to make certain that these tenants are pursued for the betterment of North Greeley. So it's again balancing those urgencies, and I think it's important for us to try to get that message to all participants, including the applicant, that these dual urgencies are what has to be resolved and rectified. And we're here to help you do it. I mean, we're not saying, you know, this is what we want, you're gonna have, you know, orange brick and that's it. That's crazy. But I think our frustration, my frustration has been, we've been talking about this design stuff now for months, and you know, people said, okay, yeah, that's important, and but it hasn't happened. And that dual urgency, the interests of the town, the community, as well as the interests of the applicant, those have to be weighed, and I don't think the urgency of the timing from the standpoint of the applicant outweighs the other. I think, by the way, I am extremely sympathetic to the applicant. We've had this moratorium for years, they've probably been held up with that. We had this whole discussion of FBC, that nothing went on that. So they're looking at the marketplace and they're sitting there saying, my goodness, these rentals in Westchester are going crazy. You know, we're missing out on the spike. This is critically important. So I think the town board's very correct to be very sensitive to that urgency. I think it's very fair, I think it's very reasonable. I think it's very responsible on the part of the town board, but we have to balance the other as well.
Yeah, and I actually don't, this is not rocket science. This is not something that you have to parse and nuance and have like 3 weeks or 5 weeks or a whole master plan in order to figure out. It's very, very basic stuff. And it seems to me that if we can get in a conversation with them, maybe 2 meetings with them, where we go over these things, we either convince them or we don't.
Who's the them in that sentence?
Town board,
Okay.
yeah, the people who actually vote.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So
And the urgency is, I don't know where the I know where the urgency is coming from. I mean, I understand that, and I really have sympathy for the property owner, because that must have been carefully the moratorium. But there is nothing more important than the public's interest in this. And we need to be sure that we promote that. And the urgency is coming from somebody else who is pushing to get development rights that they don't have. They're pushing to get development rights that they don't have.
and a process that it doesn't exist. So I appreciate everything you're saying, right? Like what you're saying is you're putting together a process that's not our process, right? And there are all these different requirements and we're going along with you. And what this does is, in a way, it's saying, we'll give you all of this, there will be some push and pull, we'll give away certain things, like we will get rid of what is normal process if we were to make sure these things were met. You know what I mean? Like that's where I think it's gonna come down to. So for instance, them coming back for a site plan approval to us, again, it just goes against that whole time thing.
No,
And I understand why you have it.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. They have to go through site plan approval anyway. It's just who does it. And the town board has put it in their legislation that the town board does site plan approval. It's the same process, just a different body. And I just would be very, very careful in negotiating against ourselves. And that just happens too often around here. I think that we need to decide, the town needs to decide what it cares about and holds on to. And not negotiate away the important things in what would be a proper zoning for the property by starting to say, well, gee, maybe we don't have to have this, maybe what if they come in and say that?
Sure,
Forget that.
sure.
That's later. Do the right thing and negotiate from a position of strength in the site plan approval process.
That makes sense to me. You know, in the interest of time, can I ask a question about this, the interior facing
Oh, yeah,
window?
that's pretty clever. It's so.
I got a tutorial this afternoon because I had no idea what he was talking about.
So I know what he's talking about, I just wanna understand
It's so
your
good.
thinking.
It's so clever, I confuse myself.
Okay,
So, this actually gets to the design,
yep,
specifically to the design.
mm-hmm,
Because in the design, and there's a model of it over there, which is so small, it's hard to actually see what's going on. But there are the interior courtyards, which actually are open space, privatized open space.
yep,
The interior courtyards, the windows, actually the first one, the southerly most one is quite deep.
mm-hmm,
And
right, because of the narrowing of the site,
Yeah.
stick, yeah.
And so the windows, the residential windows that face each other across that courtyard are 3 stories high and they're 40 feet apart.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally don't understand why the town of Newcastle, the hamlet of Chappaqua, needs to be building that kind of life, that kind of residential environment for people who come to live here. It seems to me that that's not who we are, that's not what we should be doing. And so I had just thrown that in there to raise the question and have the conversation about whether it's appropriate for us to be building that kind of housing. You build that kind of housing in White Plains or you build it in Manhattan because you have to. Because it's an urban condition and people are willing to live in Manhattan, to have the benefits of Manhattan in order to live in that environment. But we live in a forest here. There's no reason for us to be building that kind of a thing,
You mean inward looking?
facing each other.
Facing each other inside.
So that's what that is meant to get to.
Right. I wonder, if the town code, the building code today has requirements for distances between windows or distances between buildings or segments
They
of
do.
buildings.
It does, yeah.
It does?
Yeah, it's fire code for the most part.
And do you know what those,
I think it's a residential window, I think it's 10 feet from a lot line. I think that's right. It might be 5 feet. That's light and air,
yeah,
right? Window to window, it might be the same. I mean, it's narrower than we would, I think, want to have it. It's much less than 40 feet, I'm
Okay.
sure. Oh, Chuck would know that,
I think you're correct that it's 10 feet because I think we had that, we ran into that for
91.
91.
Right.
And the adjacent property. So I think we learned it then. What are the other items, Tom? You've got E5, which is the building wall shall occupy a minimum of 75% and max of 85% of frontage.
Yeah,
And then there was the other issue, of course, that's very important, the setback after the 3rd floor. So we should talk about those too.
yeah. Here's the thing about this, I think, that it seems to me that the town needs to, this is my personal feeling, and it might be also the town board's concern, that you need to really start thinking about embracing the housing problem, regional housing problem. You really, either you want to, as an altruistic thing, contribute to a solution, or one day you're gonna be told to contribute to the solution. And so that means that we are going to be having housing densities of 40 units per acre, 30 units per acre, 50 units per acre. Wherever it can fit, we're gonna be having those densities. And those densities drive, I think, they drive a mass configuration of a street wall of some dimension. You're going to be having units on the street, whether you want it or not. It's the only way to get the stuff packed on the site. With the exception of this particular project, which does a pretty neat trick, but it's not an unusual trick. So one of the principles of how you make streets at that density is instead of having 3 and 4 story separate buildings, separate from each other, a 2 or 3 story building, cottage style building. I mean, you can go over to Katona, and the Katona Street, a lot of it are sort of these leftover residential buildings have been turned into shops. But if you're going to be doing density units at the scale we're talking about, having those buildings, which is what this proposal is, these big separate office buildings, does not really contribute to the feeling of a street. You have these big buildings on the street. And one of the principles of street design is that it should be seen as a room that you're in. The public space is a room that you're in. And the walls of that room are the street wall of the buildings on either side. And the design of that street and the regulations you put on that street wall, that's the public contribution to their public space. And fundamental to that, creating a room is a room which has walls and has walls that are essentially continuous. So you create an environment which is an environment like a linear public plaza, for example. And this gets to that, and it's a fundamental principle, and there are design principles that go along with, how you do that. We don't have to get into that right now. But if we're gonna be building that density, I think we need to start looking at our town a little bit differently. We need to be looking at least the downtowns a little bit differently, and begin to think about it as more of a townscape rather than a hamletscape. And this means building these kinds of streets, which can be wonderful. I mean, they're all over the place. You go into Manhattan, there are 3-story row houses in Manhattan, wonderful, in the Village, it's just, wonderful, wonderful environments. There's no reason why we can't have that here. And I think that the density requirement is going to drive us to that. And one of the things that I thought was really could be great about this project is that it could be our toe in the water, our demonstration of this is how it's done, this is how it should be done, this is how we can look at our future and use this as a paradigm for where we're gonna go across the street. And
Which is
where
why
we're
it's
gonna
so
go.
important to get it right and not just to rush it and to think through the proper process and principles and why they matter here and beyond here.
Right, thank you, exactly. So that's the street wall thing. And 75 to 85%, those numbers are obviously negotiable, but in my experience, that's a comfortable number. And we can demonstrate that on the site if we want to, and just show what that looks like.
Yep.
The reason why I like this is because it's a very concrete step forward in sort of addressing what we're saying.
And consistent with our vision,
With our vision.
with our principles.
And how they, I know the push and pull is gonna come in terms of time and like the process. And I think that's something that you would have to go in sort of prepared to give and take to be able to get this in consistently. I would rather have this in place and give away a little bit of the process if that's gonna.
I don't understand where you're saying the process is gonna be longer. Where
I
is it?
mean,
Where is it?
in terms of what it's really coming down to, or at least what I heard a couple of times, right, is that there's a timeline that this, somehow this needs to get approved before the end of the year. We wanna get to some point where these folks are able to get going. And if that's the case, or if there is such a deadline, or if there is a perceived notion of a deadline, then either we should all sort of agree, all the, everyone included, us, town board, whatever, and work to that in a way that we can, there's some push and pull there of meeting deadlines, but saying, look, we really need to get to this. That's all I'm suggesting, is that's where, for us not to go back into sort of saying the same thing we've said over and over and over again and getting stuck there, this is definitely a step forward.
Well, we are, the reason we're stuck there is because we're giving speeches. We're not having a conversation.
Which is why I love this, yeah.
We're not having a conversation with the town board. We're just giving speeches to them. And that is a recipe for going nowhere. We need to have a conversation with the town board. And the conversation with the town board could be based on, this could be the, you know, the document that we have that conversation over. And maybe it's 2 conversations. That, and then we're done, because they're gonna decide, not
Sure.
us. We're not gonna hold them up and say, no, you can't do that.
Absolutely.
So I don't see how it's extending anybody's timeline to have a couple of meetings with the town board and the planning board sitting together and you know, and going through this, and then they're gonna decide yes or no. Or maybe, I don't know, but then we're done. I don't know what else we could do.
And Tom, you had the other thing we haven't talked about is the setback on the street wall above the
Can I
third floor.
just to
Sure.
finish on the street wall, the 75 to 85%, that number, or that range sounds about right to me as well. The only thing that this doesn't say is or addresses a minimum street wall height.
Yeah.
And the design as currently drawn meets your requirement, but doesn't meet, I think, your intent here. Right?
I think the height's all sort of dependent on the use, right? Like the minute you say you have that many units, that comes out in
No, I'm not
parking,
talking about
that comes
overall
out-
height, I'm just, you know, 'cause Tom's trying to get at the idea that the breaks in the building
Sure.
kind of break up the street wall and the sort of the room of the street. But there are no breaks in the building at the ground level. And so there
Yes.
is a consistent street wall at the ground level by the design that we've seen so far. And so just as far as if we're going to be prescriptive here with a minimum and a maximum street wall, we should think about what a minimum street wall height is, right?
Well, I thought that it was in here, maybe, yes, we should. The maximum building height, that doesn't say street wall,
No.
does it?
No.
Yeah, we should. And there is a provision in this thing that, this draft thing, could be nothing.
And they have
Which
it.
is there's above 3 stories, there's a setback. The
Right,
implication.
you put that here, yeah.
Yeah, the implication, maybe it's not clear, but the implication was that street wall would be 3 stories.
Right, it doesn't, so, right,
It's
it
not
just,
clear.
it just, if that is the intention, that's not exactly here.
Right.
I'm not, so that's that, and then, so getting back, Bob, to the next suggestion here of a setback after 3 heights, a setback of 10 feet. You know, I'm less
Worried about it.
well, less, less on board with mandating that. I also don't know why 10 feet. But to me, the biggest, the most important design principles and zoning principles are at the ground floor here. And so, especially if we're going to be making suggestions of changes to design associated with the ground floor, in the interest of thinking of what the site can ultimately accommodate, me personally, I'm less inclined to restrict height in general and mandate setbacks, but do you wanna talk about why you suggested a setback after 3 stories?
Well, yeah, because scale is important to people. And it has to do with the width of the street and the relationship between the width of the street and the height of the building. I mean, there are sort of proportions that are more comfortable than other proportions. You know, the golden section is the most comfortable, square is pushing it a little bit because once you violate that, you go more vertical, then you're in a city. And so that's sort of a delicate sort of balance that you try and reach, and in the end, there's no hard and set rule as much as there is just your personal perception of what's comfortable or not. And what I'd recommend everybody to do is to go out and start looking at these things. You can go over to, I was just over there yesterday at the, here Washington Avenue, the
Pleasantville, yeah.
yeah, the Toll Brothers project. And you go in their residential street, and those buildings are 3 stories high. and get a sense of, and figure out how wide it is, and get a sense of, well, is that proportion comfortable for us? Those are the kinds of things that you actually have to go out and look at these, I think, look at these things to
100%.
understand, in the end, what it is you're doing. That model is not gonna tell you anything, quite frankly, with regard to what we're talking about, and I think a lot of other things, but that's another subject. So.
That might be my fault. I suggested the larger area.
Is it? Good to know.
Yeah.
Red line.
Last time I pour you a beer.
Yeah.
I think that, for example, that street in Pleasantville, I don't know what that building is, but it's like 5 or 6 stories, the new one that's come up.
Next to the post office, on
Yeah.
the corner.
Where the Starbucks is. I don't know, it's like 5 stories,
Yes,
probably, 6.
5.
And the ground floor is 25 or 20 feet, I think, in the minimum, at the minimum. And I mean, if we're saying, that is too much, I think part of it is we don't know what the other side is. The assumption we're making here is that the other side could be exactly the same.
You mean of King?
Of North
Right,
Greeley?
of
North
Greeley,
Greeley,
which
yeah.
is why you're saying the setback. I mean, the assumption is possibly the same thing could happen on the other side, and so the setback, I'm assuming. But, like I said, I'm okay with the idea that the street experience is the most important at that street level, even if it's on both sides, for a certain for a certain length within the downtown. And that's where we sort of draw the line. But I agree with Eldad that, I don't necessarily think that 10-foot is going to make it is going to make a big difference on this site. I also understand you're sort of thinking about it as maybe this happens across the board, maybe this happens beyond Greeley, and so how do you think about it? But I'm personally not of the opinion that the setbacks are essential unless you really densify, so.
It would be interesting to see what ARB members might have to say on this,
Looking forward to that.
because it's
Definitely
over my
potential.
pay scale. It's really much more subjective in terms of, again, feeling and whatever. And I would feel awkward trying to weigh in on it, frankly, with some of those guys who know this stuff really well.
Well, there are rules about that too. I mean,
I'm
there's,
sure there
there
are.
are other books.
Yes.
The whole other library.
Sure.
Show other library, which is-
Actually, that was one of my questions, is how much of that sort of falls under our purview anyway, given, is this something we can actually comment on?
Well,
Given that it's legislation and
it's
the-
part of the
the planning
conversation for the
board.
site design, and whether it is or is not later on, I don't know, but
We can comment on anything we like.
yeah. We can be
And we
ignored
usually
too.
do.
I was gonna say.
No, but height and setback and building form is absolutely within the purview of zoning and the planning boards.
Sure.
I think there also is community character, and and
Absolutely.
we should all be working towards, what we want that to be, and architecture is sort of right at the top of the list for how you do that.
Sure.
To
100%.
get there.
And
So we have another note for you
I strongly believe, I actually
that
strongly
we're
believe.
rolling around with, so we'll send it off to you as soon as we finish rolling around with it, but anyway,
Glad to see you.
yes. We're trying to actually make some concrete suggestions, which we hope will be helpful to move things forward, rather than all of us talking at each other. Maybe you can actually talk with each other on real tenets and principles. Tom, you missed the stunt because Tom brought all this stuff in. Most of this is, past due stuff that he owes a ton of money to the library. And he's asking for a GoFundMe for this.
Actually, Amanda is president of the board of trustees over the Ossining Library. She wants these back.
But in all seriousness, we're really working on this, we're trying to give you some thoughts with regard to specifics in the legislation that we think will help. Unfortunately, that, I'll leave it to them on Thursday, you'll hear some things where this is where the current proposal's not meeting those principles. But I'll leave that to the bad guys to talk about. And then the other issue is a serious one, what we're thinking of doing is, if you guys are available and wanna do it, is really having a special meeting with us and have you, ARB, whoever wants to come, obviously members of the public, and really trying to work on these principles and these tenets and trying to make some real progress for everyone, especially frankly the applicant. Rather than just sitting around and talking about these generic items. So anyway, I don't know, what are you doing next Tuesday?
Well, I think, why don't you send them to us first?
Okay,
So we can look at them.
Yeah.
And then we'll figure out, next Tuesday is the public hearing, so
Okay.
probably not the best time.
okay,
But let's, why don't you send those to us and let's look at them and we can figure out how best to address it.
great,
But we love meeting with you guys.
Looking forward to
apparently. So we're really trying to make some good progress, we've spent a good deal of time. And it's not as though there's unanimity on this, but I think the thoughts that we have from all of the members are really have made a huge contribution. Even as we've looked at these, they're very, actually fairly limited in terms of the number of comments. But we can dress this up a little bit with some of the thoughts that we've had this evening and get this over to you.
Also see, the working group is meeting on
Thursday.
Thursday. So, maybe some of these can be addressed
Oh,
as
yeah,
well.
I mean, that's, yeah,
And,
yeah.
because we also have the AR with us.
Yep.
So, we can discuss it there too, and then we can,
Yes,
I think it makes more sense to have that meeting and before we schedule
oh,
one
absolutely,
for-
yeah, and part of the thinking here was that we would talk tonight to really kind of flesh out what the planning board thinks so that, Eldad and Tom really have a good idea of what the consensus is.
For Thursday.
For
I
Thursday,
think that'll be really.
and
And you'll have the latest version of this, we'll send it to you before then so that you can
All right.
take a look at
so
it.
anyway, the goal is that we feel the same urgency that you feel in trying to move forward. But at the same time, we also feel this urgency to make sure that we do this right. Because that urgency is important. It's gonna be around a lot longer than even members of the planning board, which is hard to believe. But
Correctly and quickly is-
yes, exactly. Anyway, that's the update. So, anyway, I think we've more or less talked about everything, right, of these points?
Yes.
Is there anything else that, I had some issues that are really mundane, and I think that there are some infrastructure issues that need to be addressed. I know that the applicant talked about burying the electric wires, and I think that's important to do, especially when we've heard some safety issues. I've been talking about, stormwater issues. This is in the flood zone down there. How will that be attenuated? How will it be captured? My understanding is everything now is dealt with for a 1-year storm. We have an opportunity perhaps to do better, and this area needs that. We have all this infrastructure in South Greeley that really has not been subject to stormwater regulations. Now is a chance to maybe set up a stormwater district, a special drainage district for North Greeley. I'm not so sure how this is all gonna work with the sewers. If we're going directly into the trunk line, or you're going to the town line and then to the whatever. So those kinds of things it's really grungy, but at the same token, it's really some of the planning things that we really have to I think address. If we think that this is the right time to address drainage, for example, stormwater retention, maybe this is the time where the zoning includes a special drainage district. I don't know, I'll leave that to the planning, the engineering experts, but it seems to me that there's an opportunity here. And I think it would be appropriate to look at.
Yeah, the EIS should address a lot of those things.
Yeah. And
To the
again,
extent that it's a full EIS, I don't know what's
Yeah.
good, what's
well,
coming.
and the other issue is, again, especially Eldad, you do a lot of the zoning work. Is this appropriate to have this in the zoning? Again, if it is, should it be drawn in a very generic way to let the building department, engineering people handle it? Just so that the applicant knows that it's something that's gotta be addressed. I mean, if we start putting in, the size of the pipes and, the number of pumps and this kind of stuff, that's absurd, it seems to me.
I mean, drainage issues are usually not in zoning code, but
Site plan, no? They're within the site plan purview.
Well, I think it's
Yeah,
with
site
our
plan,
purview, but I mean, maybe the broader one is, I'm not sure how that's done. I think it probably would be a town board thing actually to set up, obviously,
yeah.
and with legislation. And it may not be zoning, like Eldad said, it may not be the right vehicle, maybe just
Well, there's
a
a
different
question,
vehicle.
to the extent that it's actually a problem, it would be something I would think that'd be resolved during the site plan review process, and Bob Cioli would be all over it and require the developer to deal with it. And if it, however, is not a problem for this particular applicant, but it's a larger objective for that part of town, then that becomes a town board initiative to
Yes.
resolve and address. I think where zoning gets to it is density, how much are you putting on the site, how much are you zoning for, which then leads to questions of infrastructure capacity.
Right, and that's where the environmental review comes in.
Okay, good. Anything else? Anyone else wanna say anything? I think we lost Dick, he was there, he came, he went. I don't think he was having ability to speak.
He left around Sunday night.
So we'll discuss, I mean, I think this was a good discussion, and I think we have a good sense of a lot of the issues and the concerns and the like you said, Bob, there is not unanimity, but I think we can convey, Tom and I can convey on Thursday a lot of the no?
No, I'm gonna be sick that day.
Well, I think we really have a good understanding of the basic principles and why we think those principles are important and how the principles are consistent with what we
Yes.
believe is the vision.
Yes.
And I think that's the important takeaway from this evening, I hope.
You take the books
you're-
with you.
Your instructions
So we,
for
On
Thursday night.
will the start continue on Thursday or?
I don't know. I don't want to insult the architects. I mean, they know all this stuff, so that would be unnecessary.
So it was for our benefit.
He's good insulting
The
us.
other three architects on this board.
You're gonna say
On the planning board, yeah, okay, I got it.
The only other, like the
Right.
junior
Yeah,
architects
the
are
underachievers. I got it.
with 2 or
Step
3
into that.
degrees,
I've been
but
told worse.
I really am
Okay.
gonna be sick on Thursday.
Yeah, right.
All right, so there not being
Sorry.
anything
no, I'm
else,
kidding.
is there a motion to close the meeting?
So moved.
Second,
Okay.
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great, thank you very much. Thank you for the use of your pen.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. This is air quality.